Hi, welcome to Everything Connects, or How Everyone is a Developer at Dots. First, I want to take a moment to say that every team is completely different and every company is different. So this is just what we're doing at Dots and how it's working for us. So I'm Dner, a professional musician, music video director. In tech, I previously worked at Human Code, which was a bit of a consultancy, Roken, which is an ad agency, and Sapient, which is based out of Boston. In gaming, I worked at Area Code, Zynga. I released an independent game called Echo, and now I'm at Dots. So a bit about Dots. Dots is based in New York City. It was founded in 2013, spun out of the Hackers in Residency program at BetaWorks. In production at Dots, we have the game Dots. We have TwoDots. We also have a Chinese port of TwoDots, which we're culturalizing for China, and currently in production working on G3. Our headcount at Dots is about 30 people. So everybody's a developer? Why would you want to do that? That's what I would imagine some people might be thinking. These are the reasons. Go over it quickly this time. It's about size, about keeping your team really small. It's about having that small team work really quickly. Pride and ownership of what they're making. A common language to share amongst everybody, and then learning that comes with learning a new discipline. So this is us. This is Dots. It's not quite 30 dots up there, but these are all the illustrations we had. It's a pretty healthy sample. And this is what they look like when put into the classic industry verticals. The vertical of engineering, vertical of product, game design, graphic design, audio, marketing, admin. Then we have one dot for QA. Poor David. He hopefully will have more of a vertical soon. I'm going to help him out. All of them are represented there. And this talk isn't about getting rid of that. This talk is about how developers can work within there. These verticals are important. They represent careers, trajectories. They have peer groups and mentors, and they enable people to go pretty deep. But sometimes these verticals, they pose a hindrance. A classic problem is if, say, a game designer wanted to implement a new feature, a small feature. She would go to engineering and she'd say, hey, I want to implement this feature. Engineering would say, sure, this would take a little while. Do you have any art assets for that? Yep, I do. Hold on, let me go over to graphic design. Graphic design does it. You're like, yeah, I have these art assets. It'll take a while to get back to them. Get back to engineering. Engineering's waiting on graphic design. Finally, that lands, goes back to engineering. Engineering implements it. Once it's implemented, it heads back to game design. And hope at that point, you hope that everything looks good. If it doesn't, there's going to be an iteration process. That takes a while. And I'm not even talking about spec documents that happen here or how product would get involved. So the way that I see our team a little bit like this. All of those people in the big developer mass are implementing something somehow. And right now, that's about 67% of our team, which is pretty great. And if you look at the top right, you'll see four dots up there. In the coming months, probably by 2016, they're going to come in and be a part of the developers as well. And that'll bring us, with our current head count, to around 82%. So 82% of the people that work at Dots are developers. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how that's possible. But first you might say, well, what is a developer? Are all these people going super deep? Are all of these people opening up MonoDevelop every day or like programming a node? To me, a developer is someone who commits to a repository. It's that simple. Somebody who has something to say and they introduce it into a team repository. It's super important because once that's in there, you're a part of the team. You're affecting the team's velocity. Anybody that pulls that could have a problem, and you have to be very cognizant of that. So that weight is important. That weight helps give you context when you're interacting with these people at a later date. This helps you feel that pride and that ownership in the product and in the project. And it also sort of highlights, another thing that's important about GitHub is it helps, well, it's a social coding platform, right? Leaning on pull requests is what we do a lot. It helps spread the knowledge across everybody. It helps people learn in line with what they're doing. At Dots, we're based on, all of our products are written in Unity now. It wasn't that way. We used to be on Cocos 2D, but now we're 100% Unity. And what that's done is that's enabled us to have that common language, both in communication and in code. The biggest thing it's done, though, is it's removed that vertical that exists between creatives and developers. I hate that word creatives, but between artists and developers. Now, an artist and a developer, they work in the same thing. They work in the exact same integrated development environment. And they're able to affect change immediately and in the same space. So the combination of these two things is incredibly powerful. Without them in place, I wouldn't be able to say so many people are developers at Dots right now. So this is where we started. Patrick created a game called Dots. And he's pretty much the blueprint for what I'm talking about here. His DNA is what we do at Dots, which is a pretty broad, we try to employ people that are very broad. He's an expert in multiple skill sets. When he made this thing, he was the sole developer. He was the sole graphic artist. He was the sole game designer. He's not from the gaming world. And I think that brought a kind of a new spark to like his approach in this. So this is just one person, right? How does this work? How does this sort of like everyone's a developer work at scale? He can implement something that he sees that he can think of immediately. But if you introduce more people, how does that work? So we run through a lot of prototypes at Dots, and I'll talk about prototype X. This is just scaling up to only 3 people. It's not that big yet. And the designer on this, it had 3 people, a designer, an engineer, and a game director. And the designer on this also worked on TwoDots when it was a Cocos 2D implementation. And that, when it was Cocos 2D, it was a more traditional arrangement where the designer would take a Photoshop file, would design all of the UI using Photoshop, hand off a layered Photoshop file to a developer. The developer would cut it up, implement it in Cocos. Pixel pushing would happen, and then that would be where it would end up. But now that we were on Unity, this designer got the opportunity to stretch his legs and kind of look into this platform and see what he could do. And what happened was, with a little bit of help from engineers, with some tooling, and with 4.6 introducing the UI enhancements that it did, he was able to run really quickly and be 100% in Unity and 0% in Photoshop. He was in code all the time, making changes, and that enabled these 3 people to create a pretty great prototype in a really, really short amount of time. There's no way we could have done that in Cocos 2D. We'll talk a little bit about TwoDots. TwoDots is our largest, most active team. Right now, well, it came from David, and David, in the initial prototyping phase, he was a lot like Patrick, where he was doing all of the things. He was implementing, he was developing, and he comes from a motion graphics world, so he had that design sense as well. A great graphic designer and a great game designer. And as the game started to do well, we started to add more and more people. And so now we're currently about, say, 9 people, although it's 9 or 10, depending on who's on it for that week. It is where we're spending all of our efforts, and we're at about a 2 or 3 week release schedule. Every update contains 25 new levels, has major feature improvements, and more often than not, we're introducing a brand new mechanic. In TwoDots 2.0, which was released a couple weeks ago, we introduced over-the-air levels with limited time events, which makes us now have 7 more events that we have to put out every weekend. That is a lot of work to do for just 9 people. So I want to take a quick look at and see like how we're able to do that. So the map. That's Ariel. It's working in the map. When we had the Cocos 2D game, the process of making the map was really interesting. We would take a flat Photoshop file, convert it into Flash, from Flash bring it into Cocos, and then do a bunch of like by hand sort of pixel pushing. But Now that we're in Unity, Ariel's able to go immediately and directly to the source. She takes what is basically a blueprint from a static image and then does all of the parallax. She does all of the animations right in Unity. Anytime we need to have some efficiency, to make things better in that way, we can introduce some tools from either engineers can help her out, or she can do it herself. And all of this is happening straight in Unity. Unity helps us in another way in that we're using RageSpline for this, which we wouldn't have been able to do unless we were in something that had an asset store, and this enables us to move pretty quickly. The level editor. So in TwoDots, Toby, he's responsible for making all the levels. And what we did was create a level editor right in Unity with compile time args to be able to bring it out or in as we want to. When we're introducing new mechanics now, because he's essentially developing, he's in a new branch alongside a developer working on creating the levels and then testing the new mechanic at the same time. If anything happens, if there's any sort of exception being thrown, it's not silent. It's right there for him. It's right there in the Unity editor itself. So he can either copy-paste it into a Slack channel, or he can react to it himself. He can look at it. It could be something like, say, a variable accidentally got commented out, right? He could just go fix that in line, and he's going to be able to go really, really fast. And that's how he's able to contribute as a developer, even though he's in the vertical he's in is game design, but he's actually a developer in this way. So Dots has its own music department, Cody and Ross. And with the advent of 5.0, we decided to create a Dots synthesizer. And the Dots synthesizer will enable these guys eventually, I don't know if you remember them, but they're on the top right, will enable these guys eventually to be coding straight in Unity like everybody else. Not the entire big soundtracks, but we would be able to do it for all of the sound effects that happen in game. So this, in tandem with, say, a level editor, will be able to keep these guys testing the connection sounds at the exact moment that they create them, tweaking them, and testing them again. The way it works right now is they go into Ableton Live, they create some stuff, they export it, they give it to us, we put it in, and then we check and see what it looks like after it goes through our CI platform. But soon, they'll be able to do that immediately, and that barrier to entry is going to be much lower. In addition, Cody and Ross aren't the only musicians on the team. There are many other people that have been musicians, that are musicians. They can hear something that's wrong. They can even they can make a new sound if they want to. And when they do that, that enables them to have that ownership, them to have that pride and that contribution. If you hear a sound effect that's maybe needs a low-pass filter or a high-pass filter, you don't have to go and spit it out or get a license to live or send it back to these guys. You can affect change immediately, and that makes things really fast. The difference with this one is this isn't specific to TwoDots. This one will be specific across the company. It's a way that we keep, a way that being a developer helps not only a project, but a product. So we have another game coming up. We're working on it. I'm calling it Game 3. It's currently in the prototyping phase. It has 2 people working on it right now, a game director and the chief creative officer. If you'll notice, there are no engineers present there. They move pretty quickly, though. They have 20-plus game ideas in the first 2 weeks, trying to figure out what they wanted to do. And after that, when they figured it out, they implemented that, and started making 5 or 10 big game elements weekly. Patrick, I mentioned before, he's the CCO. He's a bit of an engineer. Margaret, she's the game director, and she's starting to get into it. I noticed, I looked on GitHub last night, her commits are increasing. And what she's doing is she's mostly just iterating on changing static variables, maybe just a little bit of the way that something looks when it tweens from here to there. But recently, she started to do things like she's creating like modal pop-ups. She's tweaking them, and she's learning how to create them and tear them down all in code. She's actually going in and implementing functionality in the game, and that's great. The next step here is to get her into pull requests, so she and Patrick can have that conversation in GitHub, and she can learn from it. Patrick can learn what she's doing, And the ability then for her as a game director to being a developer, that makes things incredibly fast. It's already fast. It's going to get faster. So a lot of good things I talked about. I'm going to talk about some of the bad things with this approach, with everybody being a developer. Realism versus idealism. If there's not a fair amount of management here, some people could come into this situation thinking, I'm going to be a developer. I'm going to make sure that no matter what, I'm going to be like affecting change from a coding standpoint when maybe their strong suit lies in an artistic standpoint. Or it might not be the right thing to do for the feature set at the time that we're releasing something. Managing that, and managing the expectations there, that can be a difficult thing to do. Hiring with this methodology is extremely hard. What we want to do is hire people that are very broad. And hiring broad for a culture, like a culturally relevant person that's very broad and good at what they do, it's difficult to do. It's possible, and we've found many people already, but it's pretty difficult to do. Staying at a high velocity while actually teaching people, that's difficult. It can happen, but you have to find the right points. And again, there's a little bit of management overhead. You have to find the right points, dive into it, and then make sure that that person is learning what they're looking for. Being broad and hiring broad, that doesn't exclude having people that can go deep. So when I'm talking about a broad skill set, often it comes off sounding like we don't want anybody that's a subject matter expert that can go super deep, and that's not true at all. The company needs that, and we have that, and we're going to keep talking about that. But really, what we're looking at is hiring people that can go pretty far across. Hiring the right people so that they're egoless and malleable. People need to be able to take criticism. They need to be able to give criticism. They need to be able to accept criticism from somebody that's maybe junior to them or is just learning to be a developer. That's a hard skill to hire for, and it's something that needs to happen and be in place in order for this sort of like everyone's a developer approach to work. Pull requests, constantly making sure people are using pull requests and that they're having valid conversations in there, learning from it and iterating on it. These are the things that are bad or can be bad. The good? Well, in addition to the other things, we have interesting case studies that I was going to talk about some. I'll touch on them briefly. We can talk about them more later. But producers, the producer in this case, he's a developer in that he's committing, say, localization code. Data scientists and UA modeler, they're contributing a framework. They weren't hired as developers, but they're becoming developers, and they're able to spread that knowledge to me, to our architect, and then we're able to kick that out to other people like the chief, like the head of marketing, and he'll be able to use those things. The CEO the other night decided to commit some code for the website. And that's great because he saw something that he needed to do. He wanted to do it. He committed it. Or he issued a pull request, actually, which I folded in. And that made me feel great because he didn't have to badger somebody to do something that he thought was very, very important. He just went and did it. And that's what I'm trying to facilitate. And we had a new game director come on recently. He's already been on a couple different things, learning. And what I see is just quick implementations of what he wants to happen. And often that stuff ends up just making it straight into the game. And the good is realistic versus idealistic. The same thing, you can flip it. Like, I think it's incredibly important to have idealism. It's incredibly important to reach for something, to try something that is not easy. It's not easy to have everybody be a developer. But if everybody's trying to learn, that is a great ideal to reach for, I think. So back to this. If everyone's a developer, you gain speed and you keep your team at a very, very small. The velocity that we're able to obtain right now with just 9 people, the amount of stuff that we're doing, it's pretty insane. When you can directly affect that change, when you become the owner of a commit, when you can become a part of that feature, when you fix that bug that you don't normally do, you can see that happen, and you can see millions of people. You can know that's rolled out to millions of people, and you can see that positively affected in reviews and in tweets. It makes you proud, and it gives you ownership, makes you work that much harder, makes you work that much more effective. The common language that this facilitates is great. When we're in meetings and people are now talking about scenes, they're talking about prefabs, talking about pull requests, talking about merge conflicts, everybody understands explicitly what this means in that context. It's not just sort of like developer talk that you don't understand and maybe you'll figure it out later, and I don't understand why this scope creep is happening. You know what it is. If everybody is a developer, if you felt that pain, that makes those meetings way more efficient. That gives context, and that common language enables you to move faster. And then learning. Learning on the job grows your team from the inside. When everybody is a developer and everybody is contributing, sharing, reviewing, everyone is learning. And that's the way to grow your studio, I believe. So in order to have this happen, you have to have broad team members, multiple masters or skills, like mastery of multiple skills. And that's why everyone's a developer at Dots. I don't have to make people be developers. They want to be developers. They want to contribute. They want to help. They're proud of these products. It helps the company, and it helps the projects and products that they're making. It makes them better. It's important to note that I'm not just talking about developers in this, though. Implicitly, it's not just for developers. It could be everyone's an artist, everyone's a musician, everyone's a project manager, everyone's a product owner, everyone's a game designer. It's about learning and applying your knowledge in an environment that facilitates teaching without sacrificing speed. It's just that I know that I can affect the change from a developer standpoint, from an engineering standpoint. So that's why I'm saying this talk, everybody is a developer, but it could be anything. And because I know how to do that, or I know how to try to make that happen, that's what I'm trying to do. So thanks. If there's questions, there's a little bit of time. Cool.
There we go. So I like the idea of kind of open sourcing information among your small team and the like, and it gives a nice responsibility sharing, gives a lot of buy-in. And as you grow, it continues this kind of common language. These are all fantastic points. How do you deal with the problems of, say, capitalism? Now, someone has a far higher pay grade, I presume, maybe not. So how do you handle kind of pay scale in this scenario when you're starting to change flexibility and responsibility?
Well, it's a tough one. I mean, we're essentially a startup, so there's not this really going on. Also, sometimes that's just done with age, like an older person. If they have the experience, you can sort of like validate why they would have a little bit more, why their pay grade would go a little bit more than in others. It's also, everyone's a developer. It's hard for me to say this succinctly, but it doesn't mean that everybody has the exact same skill set. It doesn't mean that everybody is the same like level of developer. Okay. It's about sort of like encouraging everybody not to be scared of code, encouraging everybody to want to commit, to understand what a commit is, and then to get something into the repository, knowing that the rest of the team is going to pull it out. So that is, and that's kind of a heavy moment, right? That's weighty, and a lot of people shy away from it, and that's what I'm trying to overcome. Cool. In terms of pay raise, I mean, it's hard. That's just hard, period.
Oh yeah, always is.
It's just a hard thing to do.
Cool, thank you.
I'm curious about the overhead that adding all these pull requests to your process involves. Because every pull request, you have to review it, you have to, like, obviously there's senior people that are committing a lot of time to just reviewing pull requests. If you have 30 people submitting them, that's a lot of time that they aren't writing code.
Yeah, our pull requests are pretty lightweight. Pull requests in this case, I'd say often are about the context. But we do have, I've spent a fair amount of my time in pull request land. And a couple more senior people spend time going over things, like bit by bit, interacting with it, then coming back and somebody has to resubmit the thing. We have a policy right now, it's not the best policy, no judging, is if you can't, somebody doesn't hear back, you don't hear back from somebody, and it's got to go because we have really quick turnarounds. Merge it in, but it's documented. The pull request didn't go anywhere. It came into the code, but you still know what's going on. You still have that conversation. So you have that conversation retroactively if it's important. So there's a lot of skimming, a lot of like, that looks pretty good. White spacing. Yeah, it's a terrible variable name. All right, fine. Like a lot of that, you kind of look for the big parts, you pick them out. And if it's bad, you talk about it, even if it's already in. And then they go back and they fix it. It's not like the traditional pull request way. And if it was, it would be much harder.
I teach at the Guildhall at SMU, and I teach classes where we are trying to get everyone to work together on teams. So there are artists and programmers and designers. And we try to get this point across to them that just because you're an artist doesn't mean you never have to open Unity. Like you said, there's a lot of resistance and fear there of making changes, committing. Do you have any advice for how to get over that, help other people get over that fear?
It's just, the advice I would say is, what I do generally is go sit with the person and do it. And or have somebody that they work with more frequently, sit with them and do it. We've been pretty lucky that most people don't have that fear. We hired that way. I guess we're just like-minded in that way. And we found somebody that was like, no, look, I'm just an artist. I'm not going to go in and do anything else. If that was a part of the interview process, they probably wouldn't make it in. But generally, when we kind of went from 0 to pull request, a lot of that was sort of like, let's just do it together. You'll see, it'll be fine. Like, here's the way it works.
Sitting down with them at their desk, walking them through it so they can see it's not as scary as they think it is.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest things to do, because we still actually have this problem a little bit, and one of the best things to do is to find a tiny commit. You know, like, hey, you did a project, an entire project. Let's go fold this in with the team's work. That's going to be rough no matter what. Yeah. If you can find just a couple little bits of iteration, because that's the way this should work anyway. You just iterate bit by bit, introducing your little bits that people can pull out and see, even if it's a work in progress. Oh, this is a work in progress. Oh, this is not added to. I think with artists, a lot of times, with art in general, like what you have is you want this entire vision to be done. Code is a lot easier to be like, okay, this is stubbed out, still working, some stuff's going to the log, that's fine. But what you have with art is this thing, like, I want to present this to you. And if you're essentially what you're doing when you issue a pull request, when you're putting something in a repository, you're presenting it. That becomes a little bit harder because there's more likely to be, say, conflicts and stuff. And once conflicts happen, everyone's like, I'm getting out of here. Slowly back out of the room.
Yeah.
And so that's why the smaller bits, I think that would be, if I had some advice, it'd be like sitting down and then just small little discrete chunks.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I guess that's it. Thanks, y'all.